Hello all, and welcome to today's session, Thriving Together, a Springboard for Equitable Recovery and Resilience in Communities Across America. I'm Stacy Wegley with Community Initiatives and delighted to be here with you all today. My colleague Monty Roulier and I will share in some light facilitation as we move through our time together. We're scheduled for 90 minutes and anticipate that we'll be able to offer you back about 15 minutes in your day. Perhaps an opportunity for you to take a moment to stand up and stretch and refresh a bit before your next commitment. The focus of our call today is to introduce the we and the why of the Springboard. We'll lift out several of the essential messages and point you to places that you may want to begin your exploration. You'll have the opportunity to hear from contributing community voices from the Fox Cities about how they've been taking regional action and really thinking about ways to begin to springboard. We'll also learn from several organizations and network stewards who have a number of pivotal moves already in motion. Near the end of our hour together today, we'll lay out a number of ways that each of you can contribute to what is a living springboard. We'll land together today with some ideas for next steps in advancing a thriving movement. And as you listen in, we really encourage that you add your ideas and questions to the Q&A function, which you can find at the bottom of your screen if you do a hover over, again, using the Q&A function today. And there are a number of colleagues who will be helping us to lift up your questions, to answer some of your questions directly in the QA. And we'll also plan to harvest the questions and ideas that you've added as we and others begin to build out support tools around this important work. And we're eager to jump in, so I'll hand the mic over to Monty to officially get us started. Thanks, Monty.
Great. Thank you, Stacy, and greetings, everyone. We're thrilled to have so many of you join us to learn a little bit more about thriving together and the Springboard. And I think embedded in some of what Stacy was sharing is just really our hope that this is an opportunity to discover where the Springboard might pose some opportunities for some of the work that you and your organization and communities are already up to, and how it might advance that, how it might lift that up, as well as discover maybe where there might be some opportunities beyond this call for partnering and joining efforts with others. So I'm going to do just a really light reminder of what the Springboard Objectives are. And as you can see on the slide, it was really to create a useful springboard, at one point called a blueprint, to inform non-governmental organizations, communities, and particularly initially with our federal partners, interagency groups that are really working to do long-term planning around recovery and resilience. And at the same time, the Wellbeing Trust and the CDC Foundation wanted to make sure this wasn't just a product or process for our federal partners, but again, that it would find its way into strengthening the network of community-based organizations, non-governmental organizations, and really all individuals and groups that are working to advance equitable well-being. So that's kind of the spirit in which we kind of entered into this work together. And this slide is just a simple way of saying this was truly a co-creation. It was a crowdsourced endeavor, if you will, of 100+ voices. And those of you who have had a chance to look at the Springboard, and again, it's on thriving.us, which we'll kind of continue to loop back to a couple times here. You could get a better look at all the different contributors. But as you can see, I won't go through all the numbers, 61 authors, 52 organizations, a number of interviews with folks that are thought leaders or action leaders across the country, as well as underheard voices that are leading important efforts at community level. We have 15 deep dive papers, what we're calling some of our domain leads that Bobby's going to hit for us here momentarily. And these are networks and organizations that bring some considerable expertise in an area of vital conditions. For example, food access and food security. You're going to hear from Paula Daniels later on from the Center for Good Food Purchasing, and some others, Children of the Nature Network on this call, as well as Prosperity Now, certainly the Wellbeing Trust, that they and their teams and networks put together 20 to 30 page papers that really spoke to the unique situation we find ourselves in. And we were very humbled by, kind of on top of everything else, their willingness to kind of really jump in and provide a foundational aspect to this Thriving Together report. We did a lot of community dialogues, and we did a few that we really went in depth because we know this work has to be rooted in place. And we're going to get a chance to hear from folks from the Fox Cities area in Wisconsin. That was one of those groups that we've been learning from, how they're thinking about thriving, how they're thinking about the challenges and opportunities in this really unprecedented moment in our country and in our communities. We had a bunch of production partners. And this, just as a reminder, happened in 8 weeks. So it was, and we still are obviously in this unprecedented moment that includes a public health pandemic that certainly precipitated an economic pandemic. And during the same period, our country witnessed the murder of George Floyd, which really gave rise to a massive uprising and calls for racial justice, and in ongoing reminders that we are not dealing with a single pandemic that just recently arose, but really pandemics of systemic racism and other forms of exclusion and trauma, and that the Springboard really needs, and I think as you'll hear Bobby speak to this, needs to not solve for a single problem, but a lot of entangled crises and opportunities as we move forward, not to just look at resilience and kind of moving back to the status quo, but to really figure out how we move forward together. And so on that note, I'm going to pass it to my colleague, Bobby Milstein, who's going to kind of walk us through what's in the legacy and kind of the spirit behind the Springboard.
Thank you. It was such a privilege to be part of this effort. As Monty said, we really were trying to treat this like a barometer of current thinking, and what was the view of community leaders and organizations and networks across the nation who for years have been looking at their dimension of the system that affects our health and well-being, and just how the circumstances of the past in some ways are intensified and amplified in the present. In other cases, we're dealing with phenomenon of a bigger scale and texture than we've ever seen. And so we really wanted to hear what people would say at this moment. And our team at Rethink Health were in a unique role to try to help look at the synthesis of this information, and with the editorial team, figure out a way to present this in a way that was not just an accounting like an onlooker would have, but really as a way of converting our view of the moment into literally a springboard that would allow us to propel the kind of work that must happen in the moment. And the table of contents ultimately organized into these 4 big areas, and I'll hit the highlights of them now, but there's an opening section that really describes the moment that we see now in the context of a much longer movement that has been going on for centuries and really has a much greater future. So how do we see this moment as part of a larger story? And in a minute, I'll tell the story about that. But that's a succinct and carefully crafted, the case for system change, and not looking at this at the level of individual people only. Of course, we are very much interested in the experiences of individuals, but placed within the communities and the systems that we all live within. Another larger body of content was really about recognizing, however we see the situation in the moment, what can we do to very quickly and swiftly change course toward an expectation of all people and places thriving. There are immense opportunities for action, some of it long overdue, others that have sort of become apparent in the moment, and we wanted to represent with some fidelity and detail what these opportunities for pivotal moves are. And that's really what you see in 2 levels of detail, the summary sections around each of the chapter themes, and then these longer immediate links to more nuanced and more detailed work from each of the contributing teams. Even those wouldn't tell the full story of the work before us, and it became clear as we read all the contributions that people weren't interested only in short-term actions. They really did see longer and larger avenues for renewal of our institutions and culture. And so we speak to those in 3 chapters around renewing civic life, economic life, social, emotional, spiritual life. And then it ends where it begins, back in the movement, right, with the work that no individual or organization could ever do alone. But without individuals and organizations stepping up as stewards, it's never really going to reach its full potential. So that's just a little preview of the content and how we organized it. I'll take a moment to just a little backstory on what you'll find in the document, and now what you'll find on the website at thriving.us if you want to get to pieces of this. As I said, the legacy moment narrative at the top is designed to be a case for building public will for equitable system change. It's not meant to persuade only those people who already see this is a situation of system change and the recognition that that change must be equitable. This is partly a way to tell a story, not just through the lens of those that are already in this work and know exactly what they want to do, but to win the support and the enthusiasm of everybody in the nation to see that this is a we and a why issue more than it is a what and a how many. And to really move through the narratives that are swirling around the case for change into ones that really tell a story of us, what we can do as a nation, and a nation of unique communities across the country, each differently situated, each with their own history, but able to find their own paths into the future. We try to link this into an understanding of this is not just a single crisis event, but the latest and most spectacular example of a series of crises that are endangering all of our lives and our hopes for the future. And so the consequences of inaction are elevated. The value of doing whatever we can do to change course is amplified, and it's all linked within a results framework that I'll summarize in a minute. So that's kind of the nature of the case making underneath it. We can even skip this slide. I've kind of just narrated that. This image that appears in the center of the opening section kind of tells the whole story. We are introducing the expectation that if American communities and really those around the world are gonna not just recover back to where we were after a setback. This is not the kind of experience where it's a storm and you wait for the sun to rise and sweep up. This is an opportunity, even in the depth of our loss, to spring forward closer to our ideals and our expectations. And so the proposition is that we can organize around a unifying and very measurable goal of all people and places thriving with no exceptions. There are founding commitments in American democracy that puts out the idea that we should be working for the general welfare, that we want the blessings of liberty for ourselves and our posterity. There are no exceptions in those phrases, and yet in our daily living experience, there are ever-present exclusions. And so we are so far away from being in a place where all people and places are thriving with no exceptions that it represents a lot of unfinished work to do. And that work can become very confusing if everybody is working on their differently framed issues. What we've done within the Springboard is to elevate a list of 7 vital conditions that all people and places need to survive. This is not, we don't need randomized trials to know that we need a thriving natural world within which to exist. We need basic needs for health and safety, like clean air and clean water and physical activity and freedom from addiction and trauma and violence and routine healthcare, humane housing, meaningful work and wealth, lifelong learning, reliable transportation, and that sense of belonging and civic muscle that helps us all know that we're part of communities and families and a country and a planet. But not just that we belong, but we can contribute, that we have the power to actually do things together and shape a common world and a common future. We position that pink line of belonging around the other vital conditions in this image, partly because we need that sense of belonging and civic muscle to make progress in any of the areas of policy making and social and organizational change. This represents a moment when, if our expectation is that all people are thriving, the reality is that the vast majority are struggling and suffering. even more so now in the midst of these crises. And so that places intense demand on urgent services, acute health care and addiction treatment, and unemployment assistance, and food assistance, and housing. In every area of life, there are people enduring adversity, and unless helped with urgent services, are going to suffer and in some cases die. But no amount of the delivery of urgent services can actually cause people to thrive. That requires investments in the vital conditions. And that's kind of what we're trying to represent with this diagram. What's unique about vital conditions is that they persist across generations. We encounter them on day one of our lives. They shape the adversities and opportunities and that we experience throughout our lives. And then we pass those legacies on to our, the future generations. And so understanding what we can do in the moment around creating conditions for all people and places to thrive means looking backward and understanding the legacies and the accomplishments and the hard-won victories of generations before us, and continuing those things that do support our shared humanity and dignified lives, and creating opportunities for people to participate and prosper and reach their full potential. Those kinds of legacies are really must be cherished and perpetuated. There are other kinds of legacies that are nothing like that. They are dehumanizing and may enable some people to thrive at the expense of others, and are really overtly racist and poorly fit for the moment. Those kinds of legacies must be reckoned with and renewed and replaced for ourselves and our future generations to have the opportunities that they need to thrive. And so that work ends up propelling three paths toward renewal around civic life, economic life, and social, emotional, and spiritual life. So I'll just say a little bit more about what you'll find in each of those subsequent chapters. If we go to the next slide, we formulated the really nuanced amount of information in each of the contributing deep dive documents into a consistent, short, summary sort of statement organized around each of the vital conditions. In some cases, there are multiple basic needs that get highlighted around food and public health infrastructure and healthcare delivery and addiction and trauma and violence. There are different dimensions of lifelong learning, early, cradle to career, as well as higher ed. So there are various spotlight topics around each of the vital conditions, as well as some special topics around the importance of place and faith and investment. Throughout the whole thing is a story about measurement. A movement isn't really a movement if you don't really know where you're going and how far you're getting there. And one of the things that's nice about the thriving measure is it's one of the best measures in social science is overall life satisfaction. And then that can be linked to various other metrics that tell us whether we are establishing these vital conditions, and if so, for whom and to what extent. And my colleague Shoma Saha is on the call here, and she'll speak to the measurement work and that's been underway for years. So that's what you'll find in each of these sections is sort of summary of the scene in each of those topics. The centerpiece are these pivotal moves, decisive actions that can begin now and have the promise of changing the course of community life. We've got colleagues on this webinar who will speak to the pivotal moves that they and their organizations are pursuing, but just to give you a quick flavor for what these kinds of things are, they include things like support for housing stability. We are on the precipice of a catastrophe of eviction that's about to happen. It's been happening. There was a moratorium that safeguarded some of it, but that moratorium is now over, and eviction is the problem that it was before, except now amplified. And so is this going to be an opportunity to spring forward and really not only stop this flood of eviction, but build in rent and mortgage forgiveness and structures that prevent eviction from being the harm that it is now. Same for healthcare, right? We have disrupted the traditional office visit in a matter of weeks and months, but that's not paid for in a durable and stable way. And we don't have the experience in place to make sure that there's excellence in that care. We are looking at a natural experiment of necessary and unnecessary services that have been avoided and delayed. Can we use that knowledge to actually, deal with the epidemic of overuse and lower healthcare costs? Can we boost community wealth, right? Channel capital in this moment of investment and rebuilding into CDFIs that open opportunities for entrepreneurs, and particularly channel capacity building resources to entrepreneurs of color, so that we build community wealth in precisely those communities for which it has been denied and divested over generations. And can we build that belonging and civic muscle that we have in the moment and operationalize it into local control, recovery and resilience accountability councils that actually put people in place at the center of establishing the direction, the action, the accountability of all those other actors who would love to, you know, contribute and have roles to play, or federal, state, philanthropic, business partners. But the money shouldn't wag the dog of what happens in community life. And that's a pivotal move that could happen right away. So that's kind of the thing you'll find, you know, across these chapters, something for everybody, work that is already underway in some cases and needs to go quickly to scale. The renewal chapters are a little different. These are not organized so much around specific actions as much as questions. What are the things that we could do to actually work across differences and create a future where all people and places are thriving? To interact with across those differences in ways that don't demean and dehumanize each other, but recognize our shared humanity, our value, and figure out a way to work across those differences to shape a common world. How do we think about our economic life and in the ways that we're assigning value? What counts as prosperity, and how are we investing resources? Can we be midwives to an emerging well-being economy, and make sure that that economy is co-created locally in every community to deliver routine urgent services? To deliver routine vital conditions. And there's so much opportunity to reconnect and renew our social, emotional, spiritual lives in ways that build our emotional strength, grow resilience, and actually care for each other. So the kind of trend benders you'll find in this section are not things that any one person could ever do alone. They sort of persistent, courageous work that's going to take, it can begin, it has already begun and it is underway, but it's going to have to persist over a decade and more to change cultural life, where our investments are expected that all people and places should thrive. That's, sort of the idea of universal, human norms, and then channeling resources in a targeted way to those that have been long excluded and left furthest behind. That would be a game changer if all of our investment thinking used that kind of civic understanding in its priority setting. Same for how do we find our benchmarks for success in life? Is it stock prices and the growth of GDP, or is it meaningful measures of progress, shared prosperity, the living standards that other nations have used to define their well-being expectations and investments have not yet been embraced in the United States, but certainly could be. And can we organize our emotional, social, spiritual lives around actually nurturing the leading causes of life? We know what these are: connection, coherence, people with a story that know that they are part of a world that matters, and that their presence in that world matters, their agency matters, that we are part of a long intergenerational, sort of great chain of being, and what's our place and our chapter in that work, and connecting and finding reason, not just a narrative of hope, but a reality of an expectation that through hard work we can actually change the course of our future. So that's what you'll find in the trend bender section. I want to turn now to my colleague Shoma Saha, who runs the Wellbeing in the Nation Network, partly because what I've said is that this entire endeavor of springboarding is built around an expectation and a conviction that we can move ever closer to all people and places thriving, not just as an aspiration, but something that we can measure. And the good news is that there are people and places and organizations who've been devoted to that same goal for a long time, so much so that they have begun to organize as a network. And one of the most important things in the US organizational history is the formation of a very novel network around the premise of intergenerational well-being, focused on vital conditions and focusing on measuring well-being in the nation in exactly the ways that we used, that you'll see in the Springboard. We wouldn't have written the Springboard this way if we didn't already learn from that kind of thinking that's been going on across the country. And so let me turn to my colleague Shoma to pick up the narrative here.
Thank you, Bobby. You've summarized what the WIN network is so beautifully, and I want to call out In the Q&A, Leslie said, well, what about the 300 organizations and communities that are part of the ACES network? They might have something really important to benefit from. And one of the things that we always say in our work is that this is not about one network to rule them all. It's about how we contribute together in a shared movement for thriving and well-being. The WIN network is really brings together a strategic network that of those who have said, we're willing to roll up our sleeves across organizations, across networks, to be all in together to advance intergenerational well-being and equity, to disrupt those legacies of exclusion, of racism, of trauma that have left so many trapped in terms of their potential individually, and have left our society bereft of their contributions. And that as we actually create a path forward, these paths to renewal in the future over our generation, and leading into this moment for pivotal moves that Bobby described, that this is a moment that we can come together to change the cultures and systems that perpetuate this. And everything about the creation of the Springboard really reflects that idea. We came together in 8 weeks, and instead of, Monty and Bobby going off in a corner by themselves, and they are really smart and pulling in 2 or 3 people, they brought together 100 organizations and people to think together, to reflect together, and said, what would we choose to create? In that process, we had a small thing called Wellbeing in the Nation Week, and we invited communities from every walk of life, especially communities that have been historically marginalized, to actually contribute their ideas, their thoughts, their reflections. And I can speak to one of the gatherings we hosted. We lead the Measurement Cooperative. If we go to the next slide, the way WIN is structured is different people organize around different areas that we need to create change in systems. So to change systems, we need to change narratives. We need to change relationships and power dynamics. We need to change policies and investments, and we need to change the way we measure and learn. And then we need to come together as groups of organizations and groups of communities to create that change. And WIN is set up to do that. So during WIN Week, we said, let's lean into this legacy moment that the Springboard offers to invite us into a shared conversation. As one of the people leading the Measurement Cooperative on behalf of We in the World, we were writing the Measurement Chapter, and we said, what better opportunity to ask people, organizations and communities about what they're learning, not just in the context of COVID, and not just in the context of the immediate killing of George Floyd, but to really reflect on this moment of legacy to say how we create better measures for the future. And that, of course, led us to think we need the kind of common measures of thriving, such as Cantrell's ladder that Bobby referenced earlier. But it also led us to say, how do we create the equitable policies and systems and infrastructure that all communities can take advantage of? How do we create equitable policies and processes for how we value what we measure? And above all, how do we apply a racial justice lens toward our national measurement systems? And that led to a decision to take a national measure set, the Wellbeing in the Nation measures, to actually, as part of the Springboard process, to begin to engage in a dialogue to say, if we were serious about creating racial justice, how would we change our nation's measurement system? And how would that inform federal data strategy, all the way to what we as organizations, as businesses, as health systems, as communities, begin to think about, care about, value, who we listen to, and how we engage in that work. And across every one of these cooperatives, I could share the stories of how the Stories and Dialogues Cooperative is beginning work to listen in communities about what would create that equitable economy, et cetera. Go to the next slide. In the context of the WIN network, we've been in a period of both engaging in our own thinking, of course, around together, but above all in a process of listening. And the Springboard, I think, gives us an opportunity to really say, how might we spring forward? So in terms of narrative change, I think over the next several months, we're going to be taking the chance to really lean into what different organizations have said about the recommendations of the Springboard and engaging across networks to say, to think together about these recommendations around these pivotal moves and these renewals. In our measurement cooperative, we're going to be applying a racial justice lens to our nation's measures and begin a process of renewing those measures with that lens in mind, as well as an intergenerational well-being lens in mind. In terms of our stories and dialogues and policies and investments, we'll be hosting conversations at the community level led by people with lived experience of economic exclusion about what an equitable economy would look like, to help us create shared strategies that are informed by lived experience that we can all begin to lean forward, and that will draw from the base of policies that have been recommended in the Springboard. And I could go on and on about each one of these, but what I'd really like to end my brief portion with is an invitation to go to the next slide to two things. For you to consider, just as we are in the WIN network, how might you spring forward using the Springboard? How can that be this incredibly rich, thoughtful document from contributors all across the country help us to think differently and act differently and lean in? Second, what would distributed leadership and shared power in each other's movements, what could it look like to be in a shared movement for thriving for everyone without exception? What would that really look like? And we in the WIN network would love to be part of your movement, and we invite you to join in. We intend to support the shared movement that helps takes the Springboard and makes it not something that's just for federal agencies, not only for CDC and FEMA to do something with, but in this nation of the people, by the people, and for the people is our Springboard for us to consider how we lean into this moment to advance intergenerational well-being and equity. And I invite all of us to be springing forward together and to be in one another's movements as we do so. And you know, Monty will give us a chance to really reflect on that toward the end of this time. With that, I'm going to hand it back to Stacy.
Thanks so much, Shoma and Bobby, both for walking us through the Springboard and really setting the stage to talk further about what of the people, by the people, and for the people looks like as we talk a little bit more about what this work is looking like in action. Want to pause for just a moment to also remind you there are a number of questions and thoughts coming into the Q&A panel, and encourage you to add your reflections as Bobby and Shoma will join the others in that space to be able to respond. Next, I'm really excited to be able to introduce our colleagues and our friends from the Fox Cities. Paula Morgan and Rayon Brown are with us today. Paula serves as the Director of Community Health at Theta Care, and Rayon serves as Chief Diversity Officer at Fox Valley Technical College. We know that you both are so deeply engaged with both the needs and the aspirations of your communities all the time, and particularly during these unprecedented times, and we're just really grateful for your time in joining us today.
Pleasure to be here.
Thank you. Paul, wondering if you might start us off to share a little bit more about your role and offering some of the background of the work of Imagine Fox Cities that you're doing to craft a vision of equitable intergenerational well-being.
Great, happy to. I'm Paula Morgan, Director of Community Health for Theta Care, a 7-hospital health system that is in northeastern Wisconsin, and we've for a few decades now been very involved in working to build a healthy community across this region. Our Imagine Fox Cities work got started a couple of years ago. We were taking a look at, this region has 19 different municipalities, and over the legacy that we're building upon here, we've had maybe a dozen or so leaders that seem to share kind of a common vision of what the Fox Cities could be, should be, and we've relied on them to kind of steer the growth of the area for some time, and they've done a fantastic job. But at the same time, this area is really growing, more people moving to the area. we're also recognizing the divisiveness of the time period that we're living through. And, you know, as some of these leaders that have had this vision for our area are passing on, and, you know, we started to raise the question, you know, what's going to happen to this region? Are we going to be able to continue to have the kind of quality of life that we've had so far, and even make it better? You know, who's looking out for that vision now as these leaders pass on? And, you know, the area also is becoming more diverse, and where are those voices in these conversations? And, you know, who are these new leaders that are going to emerge, and do these new voices have a chance to be part of that new leadership? So we're very, very intentional about crafting a vision for this region that could help really steer us. And we did not want to create a vision that was going to be something that was some kind of hierarchical or operational structure that had to approve, you know, efforts in the area, but really one that we could measure all of our actions as each municipality or across the region, that we could measure our actions against to say, are we kind of really reaching for that North Star? So our community came together. We engaged a variety of people, diverse populations across the community, to actually design the process we are going to go through. And we knew it had to start with some really serious listening sessions. We hosted actually 81 community conversations with more than 800 people, resulted in about 3,300 comments that we literally color-coded on Post-it notes and put across library walls, and invited the community to come in and pull the themes from those conversations to help make sense of what we were learning. And at the same time, we did a well-being survey using Cantrell's ladder that I know both Monty and Dr. Shah had mentioned. So we asked people about where they felt their life was now in terms of their best possible life, and then their life in another 5 years, where they expect it to be. And so we took all of that information and held a summit last fall that engaged about 300 people, probably the most diverse gathering that we've ever had here in the Fox Cities. Invited all these people to the table to take a look at a draft vision and lend their voice to, you know, what was making sense in that and what wasn't, and help to mold that for our future. And walked away with really 4 critical themes that are very much in tune with the vital condition concepts. You know, our community's really interested in a focus on lifelong learning, and particularly taking a look at early childhood. Very interested in focusing on our economic well-being here and making sure that we have jobs for the future, but jobs that take into consideration the whole person, not just earning a wage, but how are we giving people balance in their lives and meaning in their work. And then looking at how are we creating places for people to gather that everybody feels that they belong and are safe and welcome there. And the 4th component is about belonging itself, and making sure that all pockets of people in our community have a place here in the Fox Cities and feel like they're part of the Fox Cities. So that's the process we went through to get us through to where we are today.
Yeah, thanks, Paula. And, you know, each time I hear the process reflected in just the rich numbers, just the number of voices that were lifted up, heard. Folks had the opportunity to sit across from the table from one another in those moments, and as that's continued through virtual spaces, just how powerful it was to see that come to life and to know how it's informed your work.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Rayon, I know that you provide leadership in a variety of ways and with a focus on equity. And I know that as you all were opening up and setting the table, you stepped up to be a facilitator for your community dialogues. And I was wondering if you might share a little bit about why you chose that role, why was it important, and what did you learn in the process of expanding the circle of stakeholders and really through that deep listening process?
Hey, so again, my name is Rayan Brown, and I'm the Chief Diversity Officer at Fox Valley Technical College in Wisconsin, which is a local community college. We offer over 200 associate technical degree programs for people within our community to serve on, to participate in. The main reason why I stepped up to be a facilitator at first was to make sure that there are some representation at the community level. We noticed that when we want to have true, authentic dialogue around well-being and belonging, people tend to be more free to speak to their experience when they have someone that look like them that's leading the conversation. Also, within my position at the college, I wanted to hear directly from those that we serve to know what we need to do in order to create spaces for every single person within our community. It was, this process was not a process where I felt the need to be strategizing and developing strategies in a room that was separate from the voices of the people that I was charged to serve. I felt it was important for me to be in front of them, hearing their unfiltered experiences right away. So when I am in a room, when they're not present, I can represent their voices to the best of my ability and be as true as I can without that information being passed on to me from somebody else. That was the main reason why initially I chose to be a facilitator for these conversations, and to make sure also that while we were reaching out, whenever there was opportunities where we feel that someone would be hesitant to speak and to share and to have that dialogue, was to go in that room and create a space where diverse voices can be heard. And I was also comfortable in those spaces to relinquish whatever power I walk in those rooms with, to create that level playing field for each individual that we were communicating with and collecting information, to make sure that they understand that this process was about them, and this process will drive to creating forward movement and develop an opportunity for them, not just to be invited to the table. As one of our participants in the convening that we have, the summit, said, our population no longer want to just be invited to the table. They wanted an opportunity to own the table. And it was also great for us to show them someone that was in that capacity to have ownership of what was taking place in the community. So that was my reason personally, but organizationally from the college, it was important for us to hear direct, unfiltered message from the community members that we serve.
Thanks, Rayan. As a region and with your convening group, you all have been both so intentional and experimenting with a number really of the pivotal moves and trend-bending ideas that are emerging in the Springboard, and wondering if you might, Paula and Rayan, just kind of build off of one another to offer a bit more of your thoughts around some of the investment portfolio work, perhaps some of the measurement or equity work that you all have been imagining.
I can start that, Rayan, and you can jump in if that's okay.
Sounds good.
One of the things that we learned using the thriving metric is that it was a real wake-up call for us. You know, we found that about 9% of the population here in what we kind of think is sort of Happy Valley of the Fox cities, we found they were actually suffering, which was about 3 times the state average. And that was a real surprise to us. And as we dug a little deeper, we found that there were really significant differences by geography, by race, also by age. And so that started to give us a sense of where to focus some of our energies. And so we knew that one thing that we needed to do was to focus more energy on belonging. that came through loud and clear, where there were significant populations of people in our community who did not feel like this was a place for them. And that was a real surprise to many of us who look like me, white, pretty privileged people in our community who really didn't have a clue. And so, while I mentioned earlier, we chose not to be an operational type group. We weren't going to be doing a lot of work in the community. We are going to be helping to champion and lift up the work that takes us toward our vision. This is one area where we did decide that we were going to maybe get a little more engaged in the area of belonging and connecting in the community, because it was so important. As was mentioned earlier, it is kind of the underpinnings of all the other vital conditions. If people don't feel like they're part of the community, they have agency, they have voice, then who is going to do the work of helping to create the vital conditions? And so this is where we needed to start. And Rayan's been a big part of the belonging work group. So I'll let Rayan share with you a little bit more about what's happening in that space.
Yes, thanks, Paula. And and I think that was where my motivation shift was after being involved in hearing what needs to happen at the community level. I decided that it was no longer the best use of my energy and my skill set to sit back and just to be out front, but I also needed to be inside of the spaces that are making some of these decisions. So I guess my involvement with Imagine Fox Cities elevated to now I'm one of the chairs for Imagine Fox Cities, and I participate on the belonging group, as Paula said. And we started off working on the belonging group to make sure that we continue intentional dialogues, focus on the topic of belonging. And we wanted to make sure that we create equitable spaces and interactions for all to share their authentic experiences without, as Paula mentioned, without that organizational hierarchical structure to make people feel more comfortable. We have taken some of the lessons from one of, I think, the greats that is also focused on in this work that we're talking about today. A lot of the lessons and some of the lessons, the key concepts of the lessons came from John Powell's work around targeted universalism, how we identify specific issues that are happening to specific members of our community and throw out that old school, archaic idea of a one-size-fits-all approach, and understand that we need to create targeted efforts to solve specific problems that are taking place in the community, and know that we need to start somewhere. So we definitely started at belonging. Right now we are focusing on having conversations around race, racism, and anti-racism, because that is critical. That's a critical need for our community as we try to promote belonging and well-being. We see where people of color feel more that they don't belong. Our surveys told us the incidents that galvanized our country showed us what happens to people of color. And these conversations need to happen. We need to start to have the conversations, but we also need to understand that we are just starting the process at the conversations, and the belonging group have been committed to move beyond conversation to take in action and put in the necessary measures and systems in place in order for us to continue to build on what we're hearing. And when we talk about the dialogues and when we have these dialogues, it was important to us to make sure that once we hear from the people within our community, we would be committed to doing something with that message that's being sent to us. It wasn't just sit back, listen. We were comfortable to listen, to learn, and to also, as I said before, relinquish our power and take directions from our community members in what next. What do we do in order to have something tangible for our community members, to make sure that I might have a certain level of connections within the community? How do we continue to make sure that everyone that look like me can walk into the doors that I can walk into, and when they speak, they are listened to as much as I am listened to when in those meetings, no matter their age, race, or gender, or sexual orientation. And that work have continued. We thought the work would probably have a little bit of pause over us being isolated and quarantined and being in our homes throughout the COVID situation. But what we saw pretty quick after the COVID situation was that this was actually the time for us to ramp up the work around belonging, with people being in their homes, seeing what's taking place in our country with the racial issues that's taking place. We have been meeting virtually bi-weekly, planning events, hosting events, taking targeted efforts to connect with those that we normally wouldn't connect with, and provide a space for them to continue to share and for us to continue to learn. Coming up in the near future, in August, we're hosting a half-day convening to also share this message to the wider community, to make sure that people understand that we need to continue. And in the true sense of equitable momentum and equitable movement, this is when this work is needed. And if we want to be equitable, we cannot pause, but we need to align the resources where the work needs to be, when it needs to be done. So we have been talking about our commitment to making sure that our community gets what they need, when they need it, and how they need it. And all of that makes sense for us to continue the work in this current setting.
Thanks, Rayon. Again, just the richness of the work occurring in your all's region. I know we have somewhat limited time to share with you all today, and I'm just so grateful for sharing in this journey of creating equitable well-being in communities across the country. For folks who'd love to hear more or see or read more about what's going on in the Fox Cities, invite you to both visit the Thriving.us website, where a number of voices and stories are lifted up, as well as stop by the Imagine Fox Cities website. A number of the tools that they've used in this work, the documents that reflect their findings, and the invitations for folks to continue to be engaged with them are all made available there. So look forward to being able to continue this conversation with you all, and appreciate your time here today.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. Pleasure.
Terrific. Thanks again to Paula and Rayon. And the next voices in the room with us today are those of another group of stewards who are among the 100 plus who helped to shape the Springboard, as well as are actively shaping policy, investments, practices, building the capacity of others, and growing and connecting networks necessary really to spread this work. Each of these colleagues already have pivotal moves in motion, and I'm excited for the opportunity for them to share a bit about that work with you. And Sarah, wondering if you might start us off by sharing a bit of your field leading work with Children and Nature Network.
You bet. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Sarah Milligan-Toffler, and I'm the Executive Director of the Children and Nature Network. And at the highest level, we just really believe that spending time in nature connects us to ourselves, to each other, and to the world around us, reminding us that we're part of a much bigger story. And we really believe that these connections increase quality of life, health and social well-being, and that they're really benefits that everyone deserves. I was a primary contributor to the Thriving Natural World Vital Condition, and I'm just going to share a couple of pivotal moves that we're working on, and really hope that I am able to create some connections for each of you, and would really welcome you're reaching out to me to figure out ways that we might partner on this. This is not work that we're leading. This is work that lots of folks have been working on for a long time, and I hope that I was able to represent this large body of work relatively well in the Springboard. One of the things I think is that we tend to think of the natural world as being this thing over here that's separate from people, and we want this thriving natural world, but we really believe that people and the natural world have to thrive together. It's a balance, and if one isn't well, the other isn't well. And so we are part of a large network of organizations and people, including folks like Trust for Public Land. I see Sadia McLeod, my colleague from TPL, is on the call. We are urging all of us to think about the natural infrastructure that exists in every community as part of the critical public health and education infrastructure, not just an amenity for a few. And so right now, we are all in the midst, both many personally and in this national conversation about how we're going to reopen schools. And so one of the pivotal moves that's recommended in the Springboard is that we consider using the land surrounding schools and in the community as part of the learning environment. As we all are fairly well aware, early studies are showing that COVID-19 is much more likely to spread indoors. So outdoors, there's this kind of dilution effect that reduces exposure. And so setting up outdoor classrooms would allow students to spread out with the recommended 6 feet or more of distance while still having some of that in-person learning experience. And we're recommending this as, sort of in conjunction with, online learning and classroom learning as well. We don't think this is necessarily something that can solve all problems, but certainly should be part of the mix. And then I'll just say briefly, there are really some part of the, solving for multiple problems. We really feel that schoolyards and outdoor learning is one of those kinds of solutions, because we know that outdoor learning improves academic achievement, can improve standardized test scores, and improve graduation rates. We also know that the typical, schoolyard includes turf grass and impervious surfaces. But by reimagining how we use the public land around schools in every community, we could, reduce the risk of flooding by putting in green infrastructure. We can keep communities cooler, sort of solving for heat island effect with tree canopy and so forth, and create places where birds and pollinators can find refuge. And on top of that, outdoor classroom students can learn about the natural world all year long, which encourages pro-environmental behaviors and just how to live in harmony with nature. So, and then we also know that the natural world is really abundant in healing qualities. And, we could make that more accessible to teachers and students by implementing green schoolyards and outdoor education programs. And the last thing I'll just say about the schoolyards idea is that, all students, the data shows that all students benefit from outdoor learning, but the outcomes we're seeing in the literature are relatively greater for those who are most negatively impacted by economic disadvantage, systemic racism, trauma, and other challenges. So there's just so many benefits to this, to thinking about how we use the land around schoolyards. And so this is a pivotal move that we're working on, again, with a large network of folks around the country, and invite you to join us in that work. And happy to share more information in the follow-up if folks are interested in that. And then I'll just say lastly, there's a quick thing that we're talking about is elevating the outdoors as a platform for youth leadership and employment. And as we rebuild communities from COVID-19, we are recommending a national program to employ young people to help bring more parks and green spaces into communities where they don't exist, support the creation of the green schoolyards that I just talked about. Young people could be employed to help do that and plant community gardens, native healing gardens, trees to help with urban heat island effect. So just really, sort of engaging and involving young people in that rebuilding of our communities for health and well-being. And, to the point that the previous presenters made, really young people identifying what they want to see in their communities and then helping to build that. So with that, I will turn it over to Cherie, who is going to take us on our next conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sarah. Good morning and good afternoon, depending on where you sit. I am Cherie Collins Sims. I am the Chief Strategy and Innovation Officer for Prosperity Now. Prosperity Now has been working over several years to ensure that everyone has the opportunity for financial stability, wealth, and prosperity. And we see our work as more important now than it's ever been amidst where we find ourselves in this country. And not just from the standpoint of how do we mitigate the effects of the pandemic and of a system that has not worked equally well for everyone, but also how do we reimagine a future where we are not just mitigating effects, but actually leading where everyone is striving and seeing the prosperity that we've spoken about on the phone thus far. At Prosperity Now, there are two things I want to lay out in terms of pivotal moves that came out in the meaningful wealth and work domain that we are leading on. One is while tax reform is not probably top of mind for people amidst all of the other things that's going on, we do see the opportunity as reform and tax policy to create an engine for economic and racial equality. And so our policy team just released their upside down tax report. So you can find that on our website at prosperitynow.org. And so really trying to shape that conversation as we reimagine a different future and how policy can actually play a role in it. The topic that I do want to spend a little bit more time on is that we've also been looking at small business ownership and entrepreneurship, because we also see entrepreneurship as a promising and in many ways proven solution of building wealth and wealth over generations. We know that when there's an entrepreneur, a business owner in a household, wealth increases, and that significantly increases for entrepreneurs of color. However, we know that given many entrepreneurs of color come from low wealth communities, they don't always have the capital that they need to really start, grow, and scale businesses, which are all key ingredients to really building wealth, not only for individuals and families, but also within communities. So we've spent a lot of time over the last several months, and thus moving forward, really reimagining and putting some pieces out there as we think about the future of the role of entrepreneurs of colors and minority business enterprises and helping us to rebuild our country. In our economic system. But there's an immediate need. And the immediate need is that while we're talking about this, there are small businesses going out of business every day. So we have been really through our policy team and advocacy working to make sure that the needs of entrepreneurs of color, entrepreneurs in marginalized communities, as well as rural communities, are considered in some of the small big business packages that are coming out through the stimulus bills. We have been working with other institutions who are interested in seeding and providing capital and getting capital into the hands of entrepreneurs within communities across the country. And then we've also been thinking a lot about how to work through CDFI's, community development financial institutions, to make sure that entrepreneurs of color actually have access to the resources that they need. We know that they traditionally can't go to traditional financial institutions, so CDFI has become a viable source to actually build wealth within communities. So doing a lot of on that front. I actually timed myself to make sure that I put some things out, stayed within the limit. So my timer just went off. And so on that note, if there's any questions, please drop them in the chat. But we're excited about what we've been able to do thus far and look forward to reimagining around these pivotal moves. So thank you. And I am passing it on, but I don't have who I'm passing it on to. So Stacy, can I pass it back to you and then you can pass it on?
Absolutely, and thank you so much, Cherie, as well, and Sarah for getting us started there. Paula will be sharing a bit more about some of the significant shifts in the food system that she and Good Food Purchasing have been able to help advance. Thank you.
Yeah, hi, hello everybody, and thank you for asking me to be part of this really important project. Just for some context for folks, the Center for Good Food Purchasing was established as a stakeholder network and was established through local government. It's an outgrowth of the Los Angeles Food Policy Council, which I founded when I was a senior advisor for Mayor Villaraigosa of Los Angeles. So the reason I bring that up is you do see this moment here where networks and local government interactions, stakeholder development processes are really key in rising to the surface as a really important connective tissue frame for these visions that we have for a thriving together future. So the Center for Good Food Purchasing program was developed as a multi-year, multi-stakeholder process with hundreds involved. And it's a program that I won't explain to you, but it has 5 core values that are key to it. And that is what we have seen as being a critical issue during this time of COVID that has been completely highlighted. If any of you have any doubt that the COVID crisis is a food system problem, you haven't been reading the newspaper. And I don't think that's the case with the people on this who are listening in here. But COVID started as a food system problem. It started because of the way we manage our food system and the way we manage animal rearing. It became a food system problem because it really completely shut down food service and access to food was disrupted in many places. So the 5 values that we work with respect to the food system were completely highlighted. It highlighted that the problems were highlighted along the fault lines of the food system. It highlighted the weak ties and the fissures between small and mid-sized farmers, which are most of the farmers in our country, yet they haven't been able to produce as much food because of high corporate consolidation, vertical integration, economies of scale, industrialization. I think you all know those issues, but it highlighted those weak ties between small and mid-sized farmers and regular markets. It highlighted the weak supports we have for the health and well-being of food system workers. It highlighted the disaggregation of the access to healthy food, how those efforts are disaggregated and siloized, need to be more comprehensively managed. And while we didn't pay as much attention to it, we know that during this COVID time, we know that the food system has impacts to the environment and is one of the biggest producers, particularly animal rearing, of greenhouse gas emissions. What it highlighted, though, is at heart, it's an economic system. It's a private economic system, and should it be? Because we've been talking a lot about essential workers, right? Who are the essential workers? What are the essential services? Food is an essential good, and food should be considered more of a public good and more publicly managed comprehensively than it is right now. So this is a part of the work we and our stakeholders and our networks across the nation have been doing. But some of the key moves going forward that are lifted up and are very ripe for enactment now are: 1, the role of local governments, much more important than people realize, have been depending for a long time on the federal system to pump, stimulus into the agricultural system, but it's really perpetuating more business as usual. If you have a more regionally focused food system to a large degree, obviously it couldn't be 100% regionally focused, but to a meaningful degree, that's managed by local governments that understand what the array of production capacity is in their area, understand how to bring in economic development and workforce development to weave into having a robust economy that supports fairness across that food chain, and really very intentionally designed to provide healthy food access, not just food access, because right now a lot of low-income communities have a lot of access to cheap, highly processed, over-calorie, low-nutrient food. That's not healthy, and that's not the system we really want. So to aggregate that and to work toward that comprehensively, a key role of local governments. And the way they can do it, one of our pivotal moves here, is through looking at the purchasing power. Most local governments are the biggest food service providers, certainly school districts are. And school districts are the biggest food service provider in any given region. That they're in our network right now, but they can also be part of an aggregation of public purchasing targets that are aggregated across major institutions in a region that will support the local food economy. And that's more than a romance of let's support our small farmer. That means equity, that means inclusion, that means a lot of small business support, that means healthy food access, it means a lot of things. So those are the public procurement targets. And then the other key pivotal move is to recognize that these weaknesses, these impacts, these things that I mentioned are negative externalities that are not borne in the price of food right now. So we need to have a true cost accounting in food that recognizes these externalities that have been forced on the public anyway, right? But start analyzing food production, food products with that true cost accounting frame in mind, and start redirecting where our government involvement and our public-private partnerships involvement should be, so that we can reconcile it and have a more holistic food system. Thank you for asking me to speak and to be part of this. It's really an important effort. And I expect and hope that it will catalyze a lot of this work that we've all been talking about and accelerate it even further. And I think the next person speaking now is Tyler Norris.
Thank you, Paula. And what a delight to be here with all of you today. I have to say it's incredibly heartening for me to be hearing these stories. Speaking to Paula Morgan and the folks in Appleton, getting to work there 20 some years ago, to see how the power of community-based, place-based, equity-centric group work not only delivers particular initiatives that can matter to the well-being of people in a community, but changes the entire conversation, changes the civic infrastructure, changes the entire climate for actually getting work done, and builds the trust and reciprocity and cohesion for whole new ways of working over time. So as we talk about movements as distributed action, that's building core capacities, building power in community. It's so beautiful to be kind of honing in on our friends in Wisconsin to kind of kick that off. Wellbeing Trust was honored to partner with the Centers for Disease Control Foundation in convening the Springboard process, and of course to work so closely with the community initiatives and Rethink team as they coordinated all the work and the hundreds of partners, many of you that are there. And to be now on the other side of this feels a bit like a commencement. We talk about commencements at the end of a school year because we know that they're both a moment of celebration for a milestone reached, and yet they're but the beginning. And I think that's absolutely where we are with the Springboard as we begin to play around with the idea of the Springboard not being a noun, a great guide to possibility, but of being a verb, of what we actually do going forward. And Stacy sort of got at that so beautifully going forward. You know, for me and what we've been hearing from so many of our funding partners, the major NGOs in the country, and particularly a lot of people that wrote me yesterday after the release, that is an affirmation that Thriving Together is a narrative of hope for this country. And not just a narrative from a few corners, but a narrative that is rising from across the country with very different voices, across sectors, across perspectives, across political lines that don't often sing the same tune. And we're finding this rooted in localism, rooted in pragmatism, rooted in people trying to get good work done in their community and cutting through the toxic partisanship that is frankly in the way of our nation being able to recover and build resilience in a way that is equitable and works for all of us in America. Particularly at this moment when the country is saying, we want to preference Black lives, we want to preference brown lives, we want to preference people of color, indigenous communities. What does it look like to build equity in a way that disproportionately ensures that people who've traditionally been left out, that base builds for everyone? That we do that right, everyone benefits. So we've played a role not only in the convening, and so proud of that, but the most important role for Wellbeing Trust, and certainly for me as a CEO, is to do the mirror looking that we all now need to do, which is what does the snapshot, what does the Springboard mean for me? What does it mean for us? How do I look at our own values, our actions, the allocations of our foundation towards what works? So my comments are pivoting now from being in a convening sort of role, although we're glad to be able to play an ongoing role with the overall effort, to what is Wellbeing Trust going to do in its own swim lane to step up and begin to springboard from where we can lead. So for that, we are dedicated to advancing the mental, social, and spiritual health of the country. We're interested in care redesign that addresses the whole person, from primary care to the emergency department, and we're working very hard to get that right with partners. Secondly, we're helping lead the policy work in the country around state and federal policy to increase affordable access to quality integrated mental health care. That's where mental health, physical health, and social needs are all addressed in the same visit, and making that a standard of care and enforcing state and federal mental health policy parity laws. That's sort of ground zero for us. That's where we're beginning. But second is very tied to what was built out in the Springboard, and I think ties beautifully, Bobby, to what you've described as multi-solvers that get at the transformation of our economic life and our civic life and our mental, emotional, and spiritual well-being. And in that is the transformation of the mental health workforce and expanding the reach of care delivery through clinical community partnerships that not only meet people where they are, but that are rooted in community-centric, community-owned systems of care that are staffed by people from communities with the lived experience of communities and bring their cultural experience to the centerpiece of care. So as you'll see in our framework for excellence, which is in the middle of this, a consensus platform for what should the mental health system of the future look like, that's a distributed care system. It says, we don't want to just have specialty care over here on the side and have people have health plans that theoretically give them access to care. My sister faces this. She's got a health plan, but she can't actually find community-centric care, even though her plan theoretically provides for that. That's an issue of enforcing mental health parity. But what's also possible in a distributed mental health system is to have the workforce of that mental health system from the community. People in community with those jobs, building the design of the community of the future and expanding the mental health workforce with well-paying jobs in the community as a core part of the design of the mental health delivery system. What that actually means is that we start to shift jobs into the community and start to shift jobs even more, task shifting, task sharing as it's described, to the community as the centerpiece. This is also a very, very positive way to start to get at the opportunity of reimagining public safety in this country, right? We're having conversations to defund the police, and part of the reason that's true is that we do not need highly trained, tactically weapons-trained police officers to address most mental health visits in the community or visits with those who are challenged with their housing or to address most social needs. And yet we have all these highly trained officers showing up when 80% of the time that's not the right deployment of skills. So what does the mental health workforce of the future actually look like that, am I still live? Can somebody let me know if you can hear me? It sounds like my just went dead.
You're good.
Thank you. My screen went dead. So thank you, Bobby. So maybe it's a signal, be quiet. But what we're really committed to doing here with all the partners on that slide that is part of the movement infrastructure we've been building, the investing in, the partnerships and cohesion around the mental health and well-being movement that we've been investing in, is to springing that forward for a new mental health delivery system that's rooted in integrated care, distributed across the community, and staffed of, by, and for the community, changing jobs, changing the structure of civic life, and addressing our mental, emotional, social well-being at a time when we need that more fully. That's what Wellbeing Trust is going to be doing. And for me, it means really standing up to what the movement for Black Lives is challenging us in the swim lane we're in, which is ending the war on Black health and Black persons with disability. And we're asking the question ourselves in Wellbeing Trust and with our mothership at Providence Health, what does it mean for our organizations and our anchor institutions to live up to that opportunity of transforming the way we interact with Black, Brown, and Indigenous communities to end that war and to ensure that we're leaning into health equity as a centerpiece of what we're doing, not something to be finessed or managed at the side. So hopefully that's a little example of what springboarding could look like. It's certainly where we're aiming our energies and are looking forward to continuing our partnerships with many of you to do so. Thanks for giving me a few minutes here.
Thanks so much, Tyler. And again, thanks to Sarah and Cherie and Paula for really illuminating some of the progress and promise of the pivotal moves as we continue forward together with that goal of all people in all places thriving, no exceptions. As we move to the next and some kind of final segment of our conversation today, we're going to spend some more time talking about what it looks like to advance a thriving movement together, and starting with an acknowledgement, as Bobby did, that the Springboard is really building upon a century of work and a number of other movements, as Paula and Shri and others have shared today. And as I hand things back over to Monty, I want to just pause to invite Aaron, perhaps, to come into the room with us and offer any reflections from the questions and answer. And Monty will take us into the end of the day together today.
Great.
Yeah, we've had a number of great questions added to the conversation. I believe most of them have been answered by our team, which is terrific. The questions are ranging from how might we consider the ACEs and childhood experiences and trauma as part of this work. Also, how might we think about the Weaving Communities effort out of the Aspen Institute, and whether we're familiar with that, which is something that's been incorporated. And how might we plan to get the work incorporated into the national agenda, especially as we move into an election season? And those have been addressed, I believe. We also had some questions related to some of the resources. So just to point out, the thriving.us site is a great place to go and read the entire Thriving Together document, and individual chapters, as well as some additional resources, can be found there. If any other questions that have not been answered, if you'd like to add them to the Q&A, we'll be sure to get those addressed.
Thanks, Erin, and thanks to all the kind of sharing that's gone on beforehand. So I'm going to be really brief and to the point here as we come to an end. Those of you who've had a chance or will have a chance to kind of look at the Springboard, there's a chapter called Advancing the Movement, and it's been said in so many different ways. I think the network of contributors was really clear that we don't want to create yet another organization, another separate network. There's much good work underway that's been building for decades, and particularly some emerging movements that are speaking very much to some of the real challenges and opportunities today. As the quote on the bottom right of the screen suggests, there's not one playbook that really kind of speaks to, or that we can all, that codifies everything into one place, but really that we're able to spring forward with much greater force and direction if we pursue some of our priorities together. And so we lifted up a handful of groups that we think particularly are important in this moment. Braver Angels, again, recognizing that we are operating in a really hyper-partisan environment that is a real threat to our ability to move forward with greater strength and resilience. And that's just one group that's really trying to bridge some of the cultural divides that often are seen through our blue-red political lenses. And has been said many times here, groups like the Poor People's Campaign, Color of Change, and Movement for Black Lives Matter that are really leading the way for racial equity right now, opportunities for us to ally and get behind what are really well thought, constructed agendas and for action and change. So we want to make sure that we look for opportunities to really integrate and get behind those existing movements led by people of color. And then Active Minds is just one of many groups that's really certainly looking at mental health. I think Allison, one of the leaders of Active Minds, is on the call here, but just again, lifting up a youth-oriented organization, recognizing the importance of resilient and strong youth being able to kind of lead with moral clarity at this moment. So we've heard of so many different examples. Aaron, you just pointed to the Weavers Network and the ACEs Network and others. So we really see this Advancing the Movement as really discovering how we might intersect and support, lift up, and advance other work. The next slide here. We started off, the Springboard in a very short period of time with a series of questions, and we kind of are coming full circle and hope you've heard some of our Springboard contributors start to answer these questions. How can this Springboard propel swift action for equitable recovery? How might it guide some of the work that you're doing at community and in your networks? So again, thank you so much for Fox Cities for kind of the example that you bring. How can we join with others to advance a movement that's not yours alone? Again, as Sarah from Children and Nature Network has offered many times, we're hearing a lot of folks saying, how do I join with others? And how might we create opportunities for others to kind of bring their assets into our work or us into their work? A couple things that we've been hearing over the last few weeks is really the desire to figure out how we can, in less than just organic ways, really connect partners that want to be engaged in more deeper multi-solving work, whether that's to kind of advance and accelerate something that's already working, or as Cherie and others had kind of spoken to, really thinking about how we might reimagine how we could work together on some of these pivotal moves or renewals, some that may be in the guide or some that are yet to become, that we could make more visible in that work. The kind of last thing that I would, just like to share as we kind of move to a close here is there's a line at the very beginning of the Springboard that says, this is really an incomplete work. It's an imperfect and incomplete work. And I think that's true. There's some remarkable ideas in this particular Springboard, but I think for all of us who have contributed to it to this point, we really want to kind of push the chairs back and invite more of the movement into this, whether that's the ACES network or others that have ideas, so that we kind of start this next chapter, this work of writing the next chapter itself and really figuring out how we might live into some of those next chapters. So as you can see on this kind of final slide, have been alluded to a couple of times, we would really welcome ideas for this and input through thriving.us. Those of you who haven't had a chance to read the Springboard, is to really look for opportunities where you might discover some ideas that might inspire your work, and again, offer up some new Springboard ideas, as well as put your name on the Springboard so that we can stay in conversation as we kind of discover how we might want to move some of this work forward together. So again, I just want to really thank all of you for the examples that you bring, for the work that you're already doing, and for the contributions that you've made to date. And I know those of us who have been a part of this kind of early stage work, we're really excited about joining others to kind of move this forward for not just the next year, but well beyond that. So again, thanks so much for the organizers and for joining us this morning. Take care all.